This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Pretty fun way to close out week number 9 coming up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. Now, obviously, the Bucs are super banged up, and they actually got a bit more banged up for the weekend too. So a lot to discuss from that perspective. When trying to identify some value in tonight's game, we're going to break down my view of the spread and the total at FanDuel Sportsbook, talk about some player props that I like based on those injuries, a Chiefs prop that I'm eyeing, my favorite one for this game, and much more to get you ready for Monday Night Football between the Buccaneers and the Chiefs. This is Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast. My name is JimSannes. I am a managing editor at FanDuel Research, here to break down Monday Night Football between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs, laying out my top bets, player props, and a touchdown pick that I like at FanDuel Sportsbook for tonight. We'll dive into all that here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, with you Monday through Friday, talking best bets and player props across the NFL and college football. Tomorrow, breaking down my read of the power rankings and taking a first look at the Week 10 spreads and totals at FanDuel Sportsbook, trying to lay out some value there. I note for the YouTube viewers, should still be live 10 a.m. Eastern at the typical time for that show. Trying to figure out when I'm going to go vote. I think I'm going to go after, so should be good to go. 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow on the YouTube page. So stream it live there. I'll tweet it out if any updates, anything changes with that. But again, 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow, breaking down my initial read on the Week 10 spreads and totals at FanDuel Sportsbook. Subscribe to the YouTube page. Leave us a thumbs up there. And if you like what you hear, turn on notifications to get notified as we go live each and every weekday, talking best bets, player props, and much more across the NFL and college football. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more at FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. For Kansas, an affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus and present in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/Chat-Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's take a look now at the betting odds for this game over at FanDuel Sportsbook for the Bucs at the Chiefs. Right now, FanDuel Sportsbook, Chiefs favored by 9.5. Pretty big spread there. And the total of this game is 45.5. And there is some wind in this. There is some, I guess, weather in this game. Not as much wind. It's mostly rain. Now, looking at Weather Underground, a forecast model, it looks like the rain is going to dip out of there around midday. There will still be drizzle during the day in Kansas City, or during the game in Kansas City. So that could matter. The wind doesn't look too bad. Now, rain can matter by itself without wind if it's big enough. We saw that kind of with the Packers and the Chiefs game, had some troubles holding on the football, getting grips on the football and stuff like that. So it has to be pretty heavy for it to matter for me. Not heavy enough here for me to care too much about that. Winds at 6 miles per hour, that's not going to bother me all too much. When you add it all together, I actually do think there is some value in the over in this game. That's in large part because I think the Chiefs offense will be able to move the football against this Bucs defense here. The Bucs rank just 25th overall defensively, according to NumberFire's metrics. So they're struggling against both the pass and the rush. And that's atypical for a Todd Bowles coach team, but they've had a lot of injuries. Now, Antoine Winfield Jr. is banged up once again. Sounds like he'll play, but he's not at 100% after another midweek injury for the Buccaneers. If you look back to last week, first game with DeAndre Hopkins, Patrick Mahomes had his best single-week passing efficiency of the entire year, and Hopkins should be more ramped up this time around. So I want to buy into the Chiefs offense. And this to me is the best route for doing so, taking the over in this game. I've got this total up at 48.15 for tonight. I think that's enough wiggle room here. Take the over, buy in this Chiefs offense, and get exposure that way, despite the fact there is some weather scheduled for this game. Part of the reason I also do like the over is my numbers still like the Buccaneers side of things, and I do show value in the spread, plus 9.5 and minus 110. I just really worry about the cluster injuries for this team because we know Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are out, but also Sterling Shepard playing through a hamstring injury, didn't practice on Thursday or Friday, limited on Saturday, and then Jalen McMillan popped up on Saturday with a hamstring injury too. Sounds like he got injured at a walkthrough, which is not ideal. So both those guys are questionable. And cluster injuries are where you need to be concerned in the NFL. Like one injury, it's not going to move the needle a ton. When you got a lot of injuries at one spot, that's where you can see this massive cascading effect, especially when it's a midweek injury like McMillan, where their game plan was in there under the assumption McMillan would be good to go. So I've downgraded the Bucs a lot in my model. I do still show value in their spread despite those downgrades. And it's hard for me to tell if I've downgraded them enough to account for all the injuries that they've got. So I've got the spread tighter, but I'm not going to take it personally. If the Bucs offense does do well here, I'll be covered via the over bet we talked about earlier on. Again, over 45.5 at minus 114. So I can get exposure to via the Bucs there and via some player props. I don't feel the need to do so via the spread just because those cluster injuries at receiver are, to me, pretty concerning for the Buccaneers. It does, though, allow us to take a look at some player props in this game on the Buccaneers side of things. Now, the receiving props pretty limited. McMillan is still posted, or at least he was earlier on today. You're not going to see Trey Palmer there because I think they're waiting until we hear more about McMillan to post Palmer. So we're not going to be able to buy in on Palmer, and I honestly don't know if I would anyway, because Palmer hasn't really earned a lot of targets in the routes he has gotten so far this year. So if McMillan does not go, Palmer's role will stay relatively the same. The two guys whose role would expand are Raheem Jarrett and Ryan Miller. Both those guys did pop up a little bit last week, and I think they're at least worth digging into a bit more for tonight. Raheem Jarrett plus 550 for anytime touchdown at FanDuel Sportsbook. Miller is plus 750. Last week, Jarrett had 3 total targets. 2 of those were deep, and he does have some speed, so it kind of makes sense they'd filter him in there. Miller, 5 targets on 16 routes. He worked in the slot quite a bit. Almost half his routes were from the slot, so if Shepard were not 100%, it does seem like Miller would be the guy who benefited a bit more. In the second half of that game, Miller ran just 2 more routes than Jarrett, so I do think Jarrett could work in, even if McMillan is okay, but he's the guy who would get the bigger boost here if McMillan can't go. I prefer Miller in the touchdown market to do the discount of plus 750. Both guys worth considering. They're not guys I'm betting right now because I want a bit more clarity on McMillan's status before buying in there. But Raheem Jarrett and Ryan Miller are the 2 guys I would focus on for tonight. Miller benefiting more if Sterling Shepard is out. Jarrett benefiting more if we don't get Jalen McMillan in this game. So I don't mind both those guys. But my favorite touchdown prop for tonight is actually right here. Shaken Baker Mayfield plus 750 for an anytime touchdown. We talked about this a couple weeks ago where Baker is running a lot more right now than he has anytime throughout his career. He's averaging 21.1 rushing yards per game this year, whereas his previous high for a season was 10.3. I can't get to his rushing yardage prop because that is decently high at 16.5. So not taking the rushing yardage prop here for Baker, but plus 750 for anytime touchdown, that's not bad at all. He does have a couple rushing touchdowns already this year. Those have been somewhat fluky because he's had just 4 red zone rushes and 2 inside the 10-yard line. So he's probably scoring at a somewhat unstable clip. We also don't need him to duplicate that clip in order to be a value at 11.8% implied odds at plus 750. I prefer him over Miller and Jarrett, but all 3 of those guys are worth considering for tonight because of the fact that I do think the Bucs can move the football here, despite the fact they've got all those injuries. The other angle I want to take here via the injuries at pass catcher is taking a look at Rachaad White, because White is basically a wide receiver with the way he's used a lot of the times. So we can look at his rushing plus receiving prop. That is 57.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Over is minus 114. I actually don't mind that number all that much because we've seen White in 2 games since coming back from his injury where they've had this kind of 3-headed monster with Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker. In those 2 games, White has 111 yards from scrimmage and 67. And again, his prop here is 57.5. It's a pretty tough rushing matchup with the Chiefs where they've been phenomenal against the rush so far this year. But White has 6 targets in both those games. He's still out snapping both Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker, and now Irving has a toe injury. I would bet the Bucs lean on some dump-offs here, both due to the injuries at wide receiver, but also to potentially neutralize Chris Jones from a pass rushing perspective. White and Cade Otton would be the guys who benefit in that regard. So I like White over 57.5 rushing plus receiving yards in this game. So on the Bucs side of things, I like the Baker Mayfield anytime touchdown plus 750, Rachaad White over 57.5 rushing plus receiving yards. And again, keeping tabs on Raheem Jarrett and Ryan Miller, depending on what kind of injury news we get on Sterling Shepard and on Jalen McMillan. For the Chiefs side, I don't really want to touch the backfield. I've been interested in Kareem Hunt props before, but he looked kind of burned out at the end of their last game. So I'm kind of curious if they get more Samaje Perine and Carson Steele involved in this game. Hunt's rushing plus receiving number is 77.5. That's not bad by any means, but I do worry about increased involvement for those 2 guys. Steele does fumble a lot, so I don't know how much they'll actually trust him, but that is my one concern with Hunt is that they could leap up and grab some more usage because of Hunt looking a little bit burned out over that last game. So not going to go there. I think the one Chiefs prop we can be enticed by is Xavier Worthy. Specifically, I want to go to the alternate markets for Xavier Worthy in this game. His baseline number, 36.5, that is not that bad at all. But the reason I want to go towards the alt markets is because Worthy's usage recently has been underrated. Now, if you look at Worthy's receiving yardage, he's gone over 50 yards just once. He's gone over 40 just twice. But he's getting downfield work. In the past 2 weeks, he has gotten 4 deep targets in week 7 and 3 deep targets in week 8. That could come down a bit as DeAndre Hopkins gets ramped up, but I kind of doubt it because Hopkins is probably more likely to play that Juju Smith-Schuster, Rashee Rice role, and Worthy has a very different skill set from Hopkins. They're having him run downfield routes, and he's a guy who can break a big one, even if he didn't do that in either of those past 2 games. Right now, Worthy is plus 265 to get 60 plus yards, and I think that's the sweet spot for me, where he can get there on one long gain, or he can get there via volume. 8 targets in both those games as well. He can also take a short pass for a long game. So on the Chiefs side, Xavier Worthy, 60 plus receiving yards. That's my ideal side, my ideal way to bet this one, because I do think there are multiple routes to cash in this one with Worthy's deep volume, overall volume, and his ability to turn a short play into a big one as well. So on the Chiefs side for me, again, Xavier Worthy, 60 plus receiving yards, my top prop on the Chiefs side of things. We're going to include that in our one same game parlay for tonight's game. We'll start things off here with that Worthy prop, 60 plus receiving yards, because again, I like the over in this game, which will be the second leg. We'll talk about that in a second. And if we get there, it could be via some big plays, and Worthy probably still the biggest threat for a big play on the Chiefs side of things. So I think he would be a key part in getting an over in this one on the Chiefs side of things. We'll start with Worthy, plus 265, 60 plus receiving yards, and then we'll add that with the over 45.5 and minus 114. Then I do want to buy into the Rachaad White prop, rushing plus receiving, because I do expect that they will try to move the ball through the air with Rachaad White and neutralize the pass rush of Chris Jones, but with some screens, dump offs, and stuff like that. And again, this is also just kind of buying into the Bucs moving the football. Don't really want to go to the Baker touchdown, the Jarrett or Miller touchdowns either, just because a bit of concern there that might be a bit of a step too far where we're building out a same game parlay where things are already a bit unlikely to happen regardless. So if you go with the Worthy 60 plus receiving yards, over 45.5 total points, and Rachaad White over 57.5 rushing plus receiving yards, that adds up to plus 846 at FanDuel Sportsbook for tonight. These are all props like individually, and they do play pretty well together. Specifically, the Worthy alt market 60 plus receiving yards with the over at 45.5, because Worthy is a big play guy. We need big plays to get overs, and I think that those two do play pretty well together and could force the Buccaneers into a negative game script where I would be pretty heavily involved. So that's my same game parlay for tonight. Over paired with Xavier Worthy 60 plus receiving yards and Rachaad White over 57.5 rushing plus receiving yards. That is all that we have here for today on Covering the Spread. As mentioned, back with you once again tomorrow talking about my favorite early bets for week number 10 in the NFL. To get that as it is posted, search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe. If you like what you hear, give us a 5-star rating and a review as well. And don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube page. Leave us a thumbs up there and turn on notifications to get the most up-to-date betting odds as we're discussing them live here on YouTube Monday through Friday. If you got any questions for me, you can find me on X at JimSannes. You can check out at FanDuel Research on X at FanDuel Research. Big thank you to our YouTube producer, Justin Lane, for his work on the video side of things for today. Thank you, Justin, as always. And thanks to all of you for tuning in. This has been Covering the Spread, a FanDuel Research podcast.